Okay, it's been about 20-25 minutes since I applied this quick setting epoxy, so this is an excellent time to, while it's still good in plastic, to take your chisel and carefully trim away anything that is visible on the surface of your steel. Well, it's been a good hour or more since this epoxy was applied, and it's good and hard. There's no tackiness left, so I know that it's going to have good slip to it. You'll need to have your Kiwi shoe polish. I recommend both the Kiwi shoe polish and the release agent. And your acid brush to apply the release agent, and some Q-tips to apply some shoe polish. And let's start by applying wax to all the surfaces that are going to be exposed to epoxy. And even though we're not applying epoxy to surfaces that should be in contact here, make sure you dress this side right here with wax. We've got that. I like to do one surface plane at a time, and that makes sure that you don't have any omissions. Use the wax and apply it to all the surfaces where epoxy is likely to go, and also around the back sides here too, because it will drift around the edge. And this is the dovetail where epoxy is going to want to flow up inside, so make sure that you have that, and be sure to get these bottom surfaces of the lug. That's extremely important, because those will adhere tightly. Let that dry for about 4 or 5 minutes. Cover up that hole when you put that receiver back into the stock when we're bedding it. So now we're going to use the release agent. Use your tape to support that release agent, because you don't want that tipped over. Apply release agent to all surfaces immediately around. Apply a thin coat. You don't need to have a heavy coat of this, because you don't want to have a heavy glob. But we'll apply that release agent carefully to all surfaces. We're going to apply two or three coats, so apply thin coats. Don't let it build up too thickly. Around the front, and go back a little ways. Apply it to the underside, the back side here. Make sure you see release agent any place that is possible for epoxy to grab hold. While we're waiting for that to dry, take a alcohol swab and carefully clean out all the areas of inletting. So now we're dried, and we'll continue to put that second coat on. Again, make sure you have that supported, because that'll make a real mess. And be very systematic about this when you're putting it on. Make sure that you're putting a second coat on all parts of it. Don't rub too heavily, because that will remove the first coat. Now, if you've been watching my series long enough on my channel, you know that I'm a strong devotee of a bench vise. This one here happens to be a Wilton mechanics vise. Wilton is probably the best vise made, whether it's a mechanics vise or a more expensive machinist vise. Now, before you begin, assemble everything you're going to need from the Acroglass kit. You're going to need the black dye if you're going to be doing a synthetic stock, the brown dye for a wood stock. These are very, very potent dyes, so a couple of drops goes a long way. There's enough here for more than what these two containers have. So we're going to put aside the brown one for this. The kit comes with a measuring spoon This is a tablespoon measure, and 2 tablespoons is way, way, way too much for this application. You're just going to be wasting your acroglass. This receiver has only got a few thousandths of an inch difference between being tightly bedded and being bedded the way it was from the factory with a slight bit of slop. So it takes very, very little bedding compound in order to complete this task. Be a little bit prudent in how much you mix up. This is difficult to, it has a 1 teaspoon line in here, but as you can see, it's very difficult to measure that out. So we're going to put that aside. I'm just going to use 2 teaspoons. That's a lot. That's going to be more than enough for this project. Even a half a teaspoon is probably all you're going to need. But we'll make up a teaspoon, and you've got a mixing cup. Make sure it's got no debris in it from any previous application, and it's mixed on a 1-to-1 basis. Now I prefer to put the epoxy, the resin, into the cup first, and have your scoop handy. Don't scoop it out with this. You can use either this, or you can use this knife. I'll use the stick because I don't have to worry about it getting stuck to it. I can clean it off afterwards, and put that right into your teaspoon. This happens to be a cheap set of teaspoons that I picked up for this sort of thing, and just level out and put that in your measuring cup. And using the other end of your stick, dig out a glob and fill in your teaspoon, level it off. And again, this is why you don't want to use the same end of the stick, because you're gonna contaminate that. You can put that right back in safely and cover it up, and be sure you use the correct covers. Drop that into the mixing container. Now we're going to spend some quality time mixing this stuff. Making sure you get all the resin combined. This sets up pretty quickly. Now once you've got it to the point where you can see where it's all very well mixed in, scrape your stick, mix it and mix it and mix it. Before you get too much into it, now take your dye, and very carefully, this is a messy, 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 messy dye. Something you don't want to get all over the place. It doesn't take much at all. Just take a little bit of a dye like that and give it a try. Mix it right in thoroughly. Making sure you get everything that's visible mixed into the pot. Scrape off your stick and do it again. You don't want to have any swirly white mixture in it. This is where I switch tools, and I'll wipe that off so that I can use it another day. Now move right along, because this stuff sets up pretty quickly, and all of a sudden it starts getting hot, and then it's no longer usable. So, being very careful that you don't get it on anything you don't want, and just apply a very thin coat. Trowel it in. That's all we're doing. We're just troweling in a very, very thin coat. This will squish in, and that's why I put some of that on the top, because I can see I clean that off. We're adequately filled in. Once you've got those holes filled in and a little bit extra over those holes that you cut, you're done. You don't have to add much more. That's going to squish in and really fill everything up. So remove any excess and do the other side. Just paint it in there like that, very carefully. Remove all excess. And also remove, take your knife and work it along and scrape off. You'll find large globs. You don't want that, because that's just stuff that's going to ooze out and get into places that'll get you into trouble. So just paint it in, being sure that you have it in this primary recoil surface. Use a clean knife and trowel off any excess that you can see, but don't scrape off your release agent. That'll come off very nicely when you're all done. So just scrape off any excess that you see, and be sure that you don't have any excess amount on there. Place your stock into the, you'll see how this is oozing up in along those surfaces. And once you have that in, now the final thing is to take your electrical tape and wrap that receiver tightly to the stock, stretching it into place. Wind it around. This will provide good uniform clamping effort so that you don't have any springiness. Works better than any other method I know of. This is my own system to use use electrical tape. I do that for many things. Now I've currently got my working area set to a temperature of a good working temperature of about 70 degrees, 72 degrees. So that's the ideal hardening temperature for the Acroglass epoxy. Right now, you want to be careful. You do not want to have compound that will accept a fingerprint. In other words, any tackiness. This is right now what I would call about the hard wax state, like paraffin. You can put your thumbnail in it. That's a good time to be able to carve it. And it's safe now to remove the tape. So let's do that. Just need to find the beginning of it. Here we go. At this point, it's very stable, and you can call it fully bedded. However, I did apply a couple of windings of tape right up front here to, I did that a few hours ago to allow me to take this off. Now I'm going to turn the rifle around so that you can see it better. What we're looking for at this time is to go inside and check and make sure you have no bedding compound that is above the metal that would hook it. And I do have one piece here, and I can cut it away with a X-Acto knife. Like I say, at this point, this the bedding epoxy is very much carvable. So just look all around and trim away any excess, because I put in just what was necessary to bed it. There's very little to trim away, and that's what you're seeking to do. You can actually touch inside, reach inside, and see if there's anything that's grabbing or protruding. And if you feel anything, you can cut it away with the knife. But it's really good to go. That's why it's so important to be very conservative about how much epoxy you put in place. So we're going to leave this for the remainder of the evening, and tomorrow I'll release it from the stock, and we'll check it out and clean it up, and it should be good to go. Now, as I'll explain, this is not a gun that can be shot for at least 5 to 7 days. You want to give this compound time to really cure. You know, you put some effort into this. You don't want to spoil it by subjecting it to you know, recoil and everything. So we'll be back when that's done. Welcome back. Well, it's been over 20 hours since I set this epoxy in place under this receiver, and I've got to be very honest with you. We're in real time here. What you're going to see is what I see for the first time too. There's always that certain level of trepidation about taking these things apart. I've bedded perhaps over 30 rifles. I had one out of the 30. I had one that was so stubborn that I was really concerned. It was my 7mm 08 Model 7. I had glass bedded the entire forend, but with 4 layers of masking tape underneath the barrel, so it would give it permanent, waterproof, free floating. I mean, it worked absolutely beautiful, but it didn't want to come apart. I had to finally, I put it in the freezer for about 3 hours, and then took it out. Didn't want to come apart, but I thought, well, maybe if I apply some heat. I got a hair dryer and blew the hair dryer in it, and that immediately released it, because there was a dissimilarity in the heating and shrinking and expansion properties of the different metals, you know, metal and wood. So it immediately freed it. So there's always a way to get around it, but there's always that little bit of concern. So not to be afraid. We're gonna. Prudence calls for doing whatever is necessary, but don't exceed that which is necessary. So we're gonna use the simplest methods first. I've got all the tape off. The simplest method is to simply stick my thumb in here, or stick my finger in if that'll reach, and see if I can exert sufficient pressure. No, that's not going to work. So we'll move up to the next step. I like to avoid using any mechanical means other than just simple pressure. And, you know, especially if you've got a wood stock version, you don't want to be applying pressure here that would possibly break your stock. That's a sickening sound. You don't want to subject yourself to that. If you use any pressure on it, it should be immediately behind the receiver. But you can also apply even pressure, reasonable pressure, by simply placing this barrel right in the vise, and we'll see if we can just simply urge it to come apart. So let's step over to the vise and do that. Okay, I've got it supported at the vise here. I'm going to just see if I can coax this to come apart without stressing things too much. It doesn't want to go that way. Well, what we're going to do is take our wood block. This is a simple piece of oak flooring here, and I'm going to apply it at the bottom of the right at the bottom of the legs. I don't want to be striking thin parts of that, thin portions of that receiver, so I'm going to apply that right to the lugs and give it a slight wrap while I'm supporting. I'm going to push the stock forward toward the camera. There we go. That's all it needed. I was exerting with my body. I was pushing the stock forward toward the camera while I just gave it a light wrap with my mallet here. And again, I was directing my blow to the actual recoil lug, which is right here. So that freed it up beautifully. So let's take a look at the two components. We've got no issues here. We're going to pop that out in a moment. In fact, I'll do that right now. Let's bring you in a little bit closer so you can see the work at hand. So now, using a scientifically created piece of maple that I crafted for this moment. Here we go. She's out. So that's all there is to that. Now we can clean those. We can clean those areas out very easily. And that's coming out nicely. That's just some residue that was in there with some wax. Well, using some elbow grease and some alcohol. That's the thing to do, is to allow it to sit in some alcohol for just a little while. Give it about 7 to 10 minutes or so, and that'll soften up that release agent. So it came out great, and here you can see I've removed all carbon from the gas block, the backside of the gas block. So that way there I'll be able to tell exactly what's going on. I don't see there's any possible way where there'd be any contact now, because we established some firm clearance and set that clearance by glass bedding it back here. So in other words, that pulled the action back as far as it could be into the stock, rather than having it come forward into the gas block. So there shouldn't be any interference there, at least from this end. There can still possibly be some interference around the ring, but again, by using that skirt of tape, the 15 thousandths of tape, this 5 thousandths per sheet, by using that, it established a center position for that stock to be in when it was glass bedded back here. And that's something that can be, that's an important thing to do anytime you're glass bedding a rifle, is to make sure that you position the barrel centric to the center line of the stock. So let's take a look and see what the stock looks like more closely. And again, this came out really nicely. There are just a few minor voids on the surface of the glass bedding, but it came out. Let me see if I can position this light here so you can see more clearly. And here comes Benny. He just visited the vet. Hi, Benny. So anyway, that's the name of the game. We're going to put it back together and show you the final product. I really wanted you to get an unobstructed view of that bedding. It really came out nicely. There are only a couple of minor voids, and I'm saying like pencil-sized holes, and there's a slightly larger one down in this area here, but they're strictly cosmetic and have nothing to do whatsoever with the tightness of the stock and its performance. So I enjoy putting rifles together and taking them apart, so I don't want to deprive you of the same enjoyment. Let's do it together. First thing we'll do is I recommend, although you can put the bolt in after the bolt latch is installed, it's a little easier if you do the bolt first. So simply drop it into place like that. Now you can take your after we've done a bedding job, it's good to take a probe, a toothpick or something, to make sure that this hole where the bolt latch plunger goes, make sure that that's free. Let me bring in the picture a little bit closer to you. We put the bolt latch plunger in first with the notch on the side of the plunger right here, facing to the rear towards me. So that goes in first, and make sure that it's operating very smoothly, because if it's not, your bolt's not going to stay open on the last shot. So make sure that you clean out any issues there before you put it together. And I don't have my glasses on right now for some strange reason. I don't know why I didn't put them on. I can rectify that in a heartbeat. There we go. Now, put in your bolt latch cover in place with the protrusion on the outside. Normally, you can take that out with just finger pressure after a few times of removing it. Right now, it still requires. I guess it can come out with my fingers. When they're brand new, you have to give them a pop with a screwdriver, but that comes right out. The next order of business is to get your operating handle in place. I recommend that you put the operating handle in place, and then just simply draw it back until the operating handle itself is in line with this screw, and then come forward. That's all you have to do. Sometimes people get really frustrated with that, but that's all you have to do is just drop it into place, and that handle will snap down as soon as it reaches this notch right here. You don't have to put it in at any odd angles or anything. So once we get that done, bring it forward, and this rod right here, the beveled side of it goes upward. Feed it in carefully. Wearing glasses, regardless of whatever you do, make sure you wear glasses when you do this, because this is really something that could do some serious damage to your eyes, wipe you out in a heartbeat. So now we just put the stock back on. Snaps nicely into place, nice and firmly. There's absolutely no wiggle whatsoever. I like that. And as you can see up front here, I've got some good clearance. There's about a 1/16 of an inch of clearance all around. That's assuring me, knowing that I had less than half of that before, that's assuring me that I'm no longer in contact with that gas block. That's a nice thing to know. So we'll put the handguard, the top handguard on first, holding the receiver in place. Just simply push it straight down, snap it into place, and then finally the trigger assembly drops in. See if I can do it from this angle. And no, I'm behind it. It's got to go. You can actually feel it with your fingers easier. It goes in to that slot. Remember, there's a tongue and groove slot there. Snap it into place. There we go. Check it out. And check the safety. There's that beautiful trigger. Okay. Well, I've got the sling back on, my Garand style sling, and this is a 1-inch. It's really not a Garand sling, it's a 1-inch Garand style sling. These are available through the Appleseed Project or directly from tech sites, and I highly recommend them for the Mini-14. It's exactly the sling that it needs. Everything is great. I think it came out every bit as good as I had anticipated and hoped. The project went very smoothly. Hopefully it was instructional for you and showed you how easily you can transform, I should say, how easily you can transform a decent shooting Ruger Mini-14 into an excellent shooter. My hopes of getting out today and completing this particular series with some range testing are those hopes were dashed when I just looked out and we've got snow coming down at a pretty fast and furious rate. So that's going to have to wait, and I promise I will follow up and show you what the results were of this test. And one thing I want to make mention of regarding my last video on assembling the Ruger rings on top of these receivers. That bit about using the hammer, about using the mallet to position them, that's only to be done when you're first positioning those bottom half of the rings. That's never done afterwards, once the scope is mounted. Once the scope has been mounted properly like that and those rings have been properly situated, that's the whole point, was to make sure that the spread between them, the exact spread between them, was in coordination with the spread of the crescent cuts on this receiver. Once that's done, you can take those rings off just by using a screwdriver and putting them right back on again without any issues whatsoever. Just simply put them on and tighten them up. And I do recommend, especially if you've got stainless, to use a drop of oil, because you can get them a little tighter. There's something about the stainless, it's got a little bit coarser texture when you're tightening those screws, and they're a little bit more resistant to tightening until those threads polish. So that's what I wanted to make mention of that. I don't want you to think that you have to bash that scope into position when you go and mount it every time and take it off. Now that it's been mounted like that, I can put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off, as I did the other day. I was at the range the other day shooting both, and it repositions perfectly and stays exactly where it's supposed to be. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. And as a reminder, I'm on Patreon now if you want to support my efforts, such as buying that Acroglass so that you could see how that project is done. You know, you pay an awful lot of money to have a gun glass bedded, and just think what charged extra to have a factory glass bedded M1A, for instance. It's an extraordinary cost, which is not necessarily reflected in the labor involved if you do it yourself. So thanks for watching. Benny says hi. He's right here. He's having fun out in the snow today. That's his big deal. He doesn't like the cold, but he loves snow. So thanks for watching. God bless.